Okay. Well, welcome to to investing in the future of work. My name is Max Chapovsky. I help companies around the country find and negotiate the leases for their office space, ensuring that the space they have is the space they need and reflects and supports their company culture. The Future of Work is a series exploring our evolving relationship with work, the how, where, and why, the trends and technologies disrupting and improving the workplace, and perspectives from thought leaders on our new normal. Every decade or so, the world undergoes a tectonic shift, a jump in innovation driven by a discovery, invention, or technology. In the 90s, it was the advent of consumer internet. In the 2000s, mobile and social found their sea legs. And the 2010s saw the rise of the gig economy, streaming apps, blockchain, and so many more. Literally, it's a fool's errand to even attempt a representative list. The point is, behind each of these innovations is a group of people, specifically that rare breed of human who bets it all on an idea and launches a company to make a dent in the universe. And behind those startups, in most cases, are the investors writing checks in hopes of making a good bet. Most of the time, as we know, unfortunately, the bets are wrong, but a few times they are so right as to become case studies in the likes of our panelists' alma maters. And right now, we are again in the midst of one of these tectonic shifts, a big part of which is the future of work. And with the pandemic having accelerated the need for solutions across vast swaths of our work lives, there are myriad ideas, some of them minor iterations, and some verging on science fiction. And a lot of these ideas, some of which will end up shaping our future, are being presented to investors like the two prolific guests on today's episode. So I'm super excited for the conversation. Klein leads East Coast investing activities for Bloomberg Beta, a venture capital firm that invests in early stage startups making work better with a focus on machine intelligence. Prior to launching Bloomberg Beta, she led new initiatives at Bloomberg and oversaw SoftBank's venture team that reviewed new investments. She also was the co-founder and president of an educational training business for children and currently enjoys volunteering as a mentor with Techstars, the University of Toronto's Creative Destruction Lab, and the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Karin currently serves on the board of directors for Paramount Group and Regency Centers. She's been recognized on the Tech Week 100, Silicon Alley 100, Crane's Women to Watch in New York Tech, and New York Business Journal's Women of Influence. Karin has an MBA from the Wharton School. Gale Wilkinson is the founder and managing partner at VITALIZE, a seed fund and angel community investing in the work revolution. Previously, she founded Irish Angels, one of the largest angel groups in the world. Gale has led $65 million in early stage deals across 125 portfolio companies, and she has made over 45 personal angel investments. Her experience prior to VC includes founding 2 HR tech startups, consulting for new product launches with Nielsen, and corporate strategy with Orbitz. Gale was a founding board member of the C200 Scholars Network and is currently a founding board member of Chicago Blend, an organization focused on increasing diversity in VC and startups in Chicago. She has an MBA with honors from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Max. It's great to be here. And hello, Gale. It's a pleasure to get to chat with you about this fun topic.
Same, Karin.
So, Karin, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your investment thesis and if it has evolved at all over the course of the pandemic.
So we started our first fund back in 2013, and we gave a lot of thought to, I have 2 other partners, and we gave a lot of thought to what do we spend a lot of time doing? What are we going to be close to? And guess what? We all spend a ton of time working. So we thought it made sense to, and by the way, at the time when we called it the future of work, I think people kind of laughed when we said it. They're like, what is this? And so it's in some ways really gratifying now to have investors who focus, on the future of work like we do. For us, it's always been something that we're passionate about because we spend so much time working. We feel like we have a real opportunity here to make a difference in people's lives. And so when I say the future of work, it really means more to us than just knowledge work. We actually look at it like the full stack of work. So it could be anything from infrastructure to the top layer, media applications, and so it really gives us a good spectrum of opportunity. And then I think you asked about how the work or the theme has changed over the last couple of years with the pandemic. And the reality is it just accelerated a lot of the things that we were excited about and believing in. And so I'm eager to talk about it, but I'd love to hear more about Gale's background, and then we can jump into more detail on opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. Gale, what about your investment thesis?
Sure. Yeah. So we started focusing on future of work, or what we call the work revolution, in 2019. So definitely look to Bloomberg Beta as the leader in the space. They identified this as a huge opportunity before anybody else. And today, just to give everybody an idea, there are somewhere between 6 and 10 early stage firms that focus exclusively on future of work, or it is one of their primary pillars. And then there are a ton of early stage funds that have future of work as one of the many things that they do from a generalist perspective. So it's definitely getting way more play than it ever has before today. So to go into VITALIZE's work revolution thesis, we define that as people first, data driven, really big ideas that transform how work is done today. And I count because those are the three things we care about. So it's data driven. We believe that everything that makes work better from a software perspective needs to be thinking about how data is going to create proprietary value in the future to allow organizations and employees to continue to have a better working environment, better workflows. Number two is people first. I mean, work is all about the people. If the leaders of the organization, the people, the customers aren't happy and aren't getting what they need from that organization has nothing. So we always put the people first in everything that we invest in. And then the last is big. So a lot of times when we hear future of work, we think about tools or apps or features. We don't do that. We don't invest in that stuff. There are some investors who do, which is great, but our focus is really on things that are huge TAMs. So target markets have to be very, very big. This means that really any industry can use this stuff, which is why work tech's really cool, because every single person in the world works. Therefore, it's just a massive opportunity.
That makes sense. Now, we talked a little bit about what the future of work means to you, and you sort of, covered that when you talked about your thesis. What I'm curious about is there have been these prior sort of, evolutions or revolutions in tech, from, consumer internet to mobile, et cetera. Does this feel like another one of those evolutions, or is there something particularly special about this inflection point that we find ourselves in?
I mean, I'd
you have
say
to take
absolutely.
that as the OG. Yeah.
Well, I was laughing because I was just thinking to myself, like, even your comment about the consumerization of the internet, like that goes back to how we were thinking about work tools. Like, and you've seen over the last, decade, some of the consumer usability just get to work products, which is really exciting. And I know it's so buzzwordy. I almost don't even want to say the words yet to be the first one to introduce it, but I can't help myself, because we really do feel that these large language models and generative AI have real potential to have huge impact. About a year after we had started our fund and we're out there looking at the future of work opportunities, AI bubbled up as being really intriguing. Now, it helps when you're at when you're at a fund backed by a big news data and analytics company like Bloomberg, right? And so artificial intelligence was bubbling up again as being more accessible and more experimented by at least certain technologists. And so we started calling it a little bit more machine intelligence, because we didn't want to believe in the robots taking over the world, which I think AI, at least at the time, had that connotation. But right now, when you look at things like the things that are coming out of OpenAI, it does have that feeling that now is a really important time. And Gale, I read some post, or I think you said a tweet about what a chat GPT, and in some ways it is, there's a lot of garbage that you can get out of it. I think what it signifies to me is that this is just so accessible now. I mean, my team has a little bit of a competition running amongst each other as to how many people that are like senior execs or people that you wouldn't think of, like a hairdresser that who would be using AI at this time. And we demonstrate, using OpenAI's, ChatGPT or another, DALL-E or something. And just the way people immediately feel like they can engage with it and they want to go home and experiment with it is revolutionary. And so I think we're really excited about what you can do with this, and not necessarily like businesses specifically with it, but how it can accelerate some of the existing businesses as well as potentially create new opportunities.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I think, and I'll take this question from another lens. Any of us running funds have to fundraise. So when we're out talking with LPs, I have found that a lot of LPs or limited partners, these are the ones that invest into venture funds, don't understand what future of work means, and they think it's small. They think it's a space that doesn't have a lot of richness to it, which I think is it couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, we are in a place where I think we're finally starting to see from a lot of different angles that there's a lot happening and a lot that will happen in a continual fashion from the work technology side. And so I don't know that it's an inflection point, but I think it's almost like we're getting more interest from the masses, to Karin's point about how accessible it is. And so I think I'm starting to see from limited partners that they're finally starting to get it, which to me says like we're getting to a point where it's inevitably going to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, place to invest in the coming 5 to 10 years.
I mean, Gale, it's remarkable how many portfolio companies or founders you backed. And I think if you just take the number of companies you backed and the number of companies we backed, I mean, any LP that has questions, you're just like, okay, well, this is just a small fraction of the universe. And look how many opportunities we've been able to find. Anyway, it's interesting. It's interesting that we only have one LP, so I don't have as much real-time feedback from the folks that invest in funds, and so that's a really interesting anecdote to hear. And happy to help fight the cause, the good fight, if you want sometime.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's kind of fascinating. Actually, it maybe inflection point isn't the best terminology. Maybe the terminology is critical mass, specifically as it relates to computing power, right? Like Moore's law. I mean, ChatGPT would be impossible 2 years ago, right? And it's funny, I was thinking the other day, I got an Apple Watch recently, and it's shocking to me that the computing power on my wrist is probably, I would assume, stronger than the computing power that sent the first Apollo mission to the moon. Like, blows my mind, right? So if you just think about where we are now and what we can do with ChatGPT and GPT and these other platforms, how much more accessible is going to be even a year from now and 2 years from now. And, I think, Karin, to your point, like, it's an important time.
It's an important time. It's also fascinating to me about how some of the school systems are reacting to this. And anyway, it's something I'm personally just independently passionate about as starting an education business. Is I wholeheartedly believe we have to embrace this instead of burying our heads in the sands about. So anyway, we won't get into policy discussions, but I'd love to see more school systems figure out how to teach our next generation how to use this, and for them to start thinking about ways that we can, build new companies out of it or make our lives better through using it.
How to use it without becoming overly reliant on it and using it as a crutch. How to use it in the right way, probably. So let's talk about funding. I talked to a lot of founders that have expressed frustration, and the feedback has been that fundraising is difficult right now, and there's a number of confounding variables you could probably look at. But in your mind, And Gale, I'd love to get your take on this. Is it a function of the economy? Is it a lack of good ideas? Or are people just expecting VCs to fight over them like it's 2019?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to give a quick background about what happened in 2020 and 2021 to get us to where we are today. There was just so much capital in the markets at all stages, early stage, mid and then late stage, just tons of capital flowing to founders. And I think that created some expectations that maybe are not grounded in fundamentals. And I think we're seeing a reversion or a correction right now to market fundamentals, which is it's a good thing. Yes, funding is a little bit harder to come by for some founders, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I do think we probably funded as a collective group of VCs in the last 2 years way more than we should have. It's not that just throwing dollars at more companies means we will have a net additional number of companies make it to the next stage. You have to really think about things like market opportunity and the team. Is the team able to execute? And how big can this get? Is the product good? And I don't think just because VCs are more willing to throw dollars means we saw more quality companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we take that to the founder's perspective today, my suggestion is always focus on fundamentals. How do you get to product market fit? How do you prove that customers are going to give you money for what you're buying? That's the quickest way to get money from VCs. And I think we got a little bit away from that in the last 2 years when there was so much hype in the market that we all just need to remember, let's focus on what actually builds a business, and that is revenue generation and product market fit.
Yeah.
And Gale's 100% right there. I mean, founders ideally put themselves in a position where they don't need the funding, where they're really just using it for growth. And what I'd say also is to any founders that are on the phone or on the Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever forum they're viewing us by, I wouldn't be deterred in starting a company if you believe in what you're building and you see there being a real opportunity. Most of the headlines that we hear, the difficulties around raises are happening at the much later stages. Those approximate markets, right? So if you see the public markets are being a lot more conservative around valuations and multiples, that same thing's going to trickle down to the later stage companies. At the seed stage and the pre-seed stages where we invest, there still is an abundance of capital for good ideas and talented teams. And so anyway, I'd keep at it. And I'd also just reflect on the last couple of years, as so much of what gets circulated are the stories. Like tech can be pretty good about telling stories. And I raised my round after three meetings, and I was oversubscribed 10 times. I mean, those are a small percentage of the businesses actually have that. I mean, we're talking about, we end up probably backing 1% of the companies that we look at, and that's been pretty consistent. And that's the reality around most venture. And so if somebody has a really compelling idea and they're a talented team, big TAM, like Gale said, there's going to be funding available for them, regardless of whether it's 3 years ago or it's today. And the valuations have been relatively close. Like it hasn't shifted that much, at least at the stages at which we operate, for the best types of companies.
It's funny that you mentioned stories, because to me that the narrative is kind of everything, right? So the interesting narrative that I think a lot of tech founders aren't talking about right now is the fact that between the three of them, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are in the process of laying off 40,000 people, which for Google is their largest ever layoff. And so it's interesting because the oversubscription wasn't just in terms of the capital, it was in terms of the human capital as well for some of these large orgs.
And Max, what it shows though is it's a great time to start a company, right? Like there's a lot of talent at these organizations that's going to be coming on the market, and there's a lot of people who are like reflecting on life, saying, okay, I'd been at a big company for a while, but I really see this pain point. I mean, I can't help myself. I'm really impressed, obviously, by the founder of Bloomberg. He was fired from a large Wall Street firm, and he had wanted to start a product, and they kind of ignored him. And fast forward to today, Bloomberg employs over 20,000 people, right? And we're continuing to hire. And anyway, so I see that from some of these challenging times, good things can kind of come out of it. Hopefully.
Good idea and good team, right? Good idea and good team. That's what it comes down to. So let's dig in on sort of the main topic today, which is what you're excited about. What opportunities are out there that are, really sort of promising, whether these are ideas or themes that you're seeing or trends. Gale, why don't we start with you? What are you most excited about?
There are 5 areas that our fund focuses on. 3 of them are kind of traditional HR tech. So it's new hiring solutions, because only about 15% of companies are actually good at hiring. So it's a huge problem. Number 2 is learning and development. Number 3 is employee engagement, retention, and analytics. So then beyond traditional HR tech, which will only be about 1/3 of our portfolio, we are very bullish on the freelance economy. This is one of the things I'm most excited about, and the infrastructure that's powering that part of the economy. As before the pandemic, about 10% of people did some form of freelance or gig work, and now it's close to 50%. So we're just seeing huge growth here. And then the last one is transformative workflows. So this is back to the data and AI driven, really transformative software for enterprise that's changing how work is being done and making it, just extraordinarily better. So within that, I can share a couple of themes that we've just invested in or that we're looking at. One is decision infrastructure. I feel like if we think about work, one of the things that is still really broken is how we make decisions as teams and as organizations. So we're going to make a couple of bets in this fund on how do we really improve that dramatically. Another thing that we had been looking for, where we just did a deal in the last few months, is a completely productized learning and development solution. So if you think about how learning and development is done today, it's all individual coaches typically, and that's not scalable. And one of the problems that we have as AI comes in, millions and millions of jobs are expected to be supplanted by machines. But at the same time, even more jobs are going to be created in other areas. And so reskilling and upskilling learning and development is just extremely important. It's a huge TAM. So we wanted to find something that's very, very scalable there. And then a couple other things that I think about, I want to make a mental health bet out of this fund. I haven't found the right model yet, but that's really important, thinking about that from the organizational leadership perspective. And then the last 2 things that kind of are in the back of my mind always is, right now, I think we're seeing some interesting trends with Gen Z coming up and what they expect from the workforce. And then also what's happening with women in the workforce right now. And we need to spend a little bit more time and energy and focus to make sure that those 2 segments of the workforce are taken care of.
I'm just curious, a clarifying question. What are you finding that Gen Zs expect from the workforce?
So in a nutshell, Gen Zs care about values. They're purpose-driven. They want to make a difference. They want autonomy. They want to be able to feel like they're making a personal impact at their company. And so if you think about how work has historically been done, it was very much, pay your dues type of culture from previous generations.
Yep.
So for example, I was talking with one of my LPs who is at a consulting firm, and he said they have somewhat of a crisis on their hands because the Gen Zs coming in expect to have tons of autonomy right at the bat and move into a partner role extremely fast. When they realize that's not going to happen, they're leaving. And so now this firm is sitting there saying like, oh crap, I have to figure out how are we going to incentivize the younger set to stay with us. So leaders have to really reimagine what development looks like within organizations. And I don't know that we have figured that out yet.
So interesting. So interesting. Karin?
Gale, well, I was just like, you could see probably there was a big smile on my face as you were saying this. I'd love to find some of these things and work with you on them, because I mean, consistently what you're just talking about the laddering and the promotional track. Like I feel we've been investing in learning and development type companies over the life of the fund. And I am really looking for something that kind of creates those pathways so that people can, continue to learn on the job and ideally be retained at part of that if they see the path to growing within an organization. So I really enjoyed that theme. And also it's since early days, I don't know why this doesn't exist. And if anybody who is listening to this in any way is building this area, so we'd love to hear it, is how to do massive reskilling at scale. Like I just haven't seen many great opportunities come across, and I'm so surprised by that. Like it does seem that there should be something out there that takes somebody who has certain skills and helps guide them onto a more modern career path, or a career path that can benefit from some of those capabilities that they have. And truthfully, it's going to be really important for us to continue to grow. I mean, I wrote a piece a while ago about like how everyone's living to 100, or if we could live to 100, think about how many jobs we'd have. And I mean, we're going to have to be continually improving our skill sets in order to be able to do that. So that excites us as well. So I really like the people side of things that Gale mentioned. That's all in the heart of what we do at Bloomberg Beta. I'd say some other themes that are kind of bubbling up that are interesting are around like hybrid work and some of the tooling that's required in order to make that really effective. And, Gale, you were mentioning decision making. Like decision making is hard when everyone's in the same room. Like, how do you do it when people are in different time zones?
Yeah.
It's something that we need to get better at. And I think it's a really taxing on leaders to try and figure it out. So I'd like to see something like that. And we've invested in a few companies over time. They've gotten acquired or been along the way. And we haven't really seen the full vision come together of, is there a way to be able to, you mentioned mental health, like proactively tell when somebody needs more coaching or more intervention. And it's a slippery slope given, PII and, the concern around privacy of workers' data. But I think leaders are being asked to do so much these days. And I just wish there were more prompts to help people who aren't necessarily getting the training, who are getting promoted rapidly, do their jobs in a distributed way. So that kind of development and prompting seems like something that should be accessible through our communications. So I'd love to see that. And then a final thing that I just say as an area that's been a common kind of theme for us has been modernizing existing processes or industries. It just seems like there's so many great tools that are out there through that tech workers get access to, and there still are industries that are very paper-based or fax-driven or phone call-driven, and modernizing work means helping those industries get access to those kind of tools. And it's been really successful for us through anything from title insurance to shipping through through companies like Doma and Flexport.
Maybe something to potentially help the FAA avoid relying on 30-year-old mainframe technology. That'd be nice.
Well, exactly. And we actually have a company called Airspace Intelligence, which does a little bit of helping optimize routing, which I dare I say probably could have been useful in the last.
I mean, maybe a manual, maybe following any sort of protocol. I mean, I guess there were like two databases and they were trying to reconcile them, and some contractor just overwrote a bunch of files. So, you have to ground all air traffic in the US since the first time since September 11th. So that's that kind of blew my mind a little bit. Are there any examples that come to mind? Speaking of blowing your mind, are there any examples that come to mind of any ideas that you've heard that really just made you feel like, wow, this is a brave new world. I would have never even thought about this, but the impact that it could have on the future of work is just groundbreaking. Is there anything that comes to mind?
We certainly always want more, but what I'd say, the large language models kind of stuff, and Chat GPT is one example of it, but Dolly and some of the other, I would, if anybody on this call, or I keep saying call, it's video call, video stream, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc., it hasn't experimented and gone to OpenAI's playground, they really should, and just see the different functionality that's coming available. To me, it blows my mind that anybody can just access that and use it potentially. So that's a big hurdle, a big innovation.
To answer your question directly, I haven't yet seen anything that has blown my mind, and maybe that's because I'm in this space day in and day out. And I get really excited about, the decision infrastructure software that we invested in. I think has just massive potential because every single industry can use it, and it could, shave hours off of each person's day. So if you think about the impact of that, it's that to me is the kind of stuff that's mind blowing. But the actual technology is not, it's just really hard to build. So you need the right team, you need the right technology, like all that magic has to come together for something like that to work. I do think moving forward, we'll start to see some crazy stuff in this space now that, back to our initial conversation, there's just more mass adoption. Things like AI and the metaverse. It's going to be a really fun decade, I think, in future of work investing.
Hey, Gale, what's the name of that company? It does sound really interesting. Is it something that is a consumer-ish kind of product, or is it only accessible through like enterprise sales?
It's an enterprise. I'll send you information on it. And then we're looking at another one right now in the decision space that comes at it from a different angle. I'll send you that one as well.
Great.
Gale, you talked about mental health. I want to touch on that a little bit more. There have been a couple of episodes now that I've done where people have talked about the need, not just the need for it, but the need for leaders to kind of lead by example, right? And lead with vulnerability. What I'm curious about is, to me, it seems like it's such a personal and individualized space that I don't know if, not that you're suggesting this, but I don't know if AI is the answer. And if the answer is, matching, people to therapists, I don't know how scalable that is per se, which even doesn't even address the preceding point of, there are those that seek therapy because they realize they could benefit from it. But then there are those that either don't realize it or think it's not going to help them. So then there's this preceding step of, maybe helping them decide if it's something they need. But then that gets into a whole host of like privacy issues and all of just Pandora's box. So do you think there's an answer to that, or are we just not even in a place where we have all the data to even think about the answer?
There are two primary models I've seen in the mental health space within the work environment. Number one is matchmaking. So how do you get the right therapist in front of the right employee at scale? But to your point, that's still a live, real person doing that. The other one is group and cohort-based therapies, which is really interesting. I haven't made a bet there yet because I'm not sure that that's the right model. I think the right model is going to be some combination of, AI coaching for some things, and then specialist therapists that get pulled in for certain things in a very finite basis. But the AI has to drive that. It has to be really smart about when do you need that person to come in. And maybe it's also combined with group therapy or something I haven't even seen yet. But I definitely talk to probably one or two mental health companies per month because I like to stay up on it. I think it is really important. And the cool thing is I've seen so many, like when it comes across my desk, I'm going to probably commit to it on the call.
Amazing.
I was going to say, I mean, the encouraging thing is there's been a rise in founders who are trying to tackle this area, and it's become that has been a trend. It's become less taboo to talk about it, and I appreciate when founders have that level of relationship with us where they will share the challenges that are going on. So I'd love to see that that support kind of infiltrate the office place much more. Yeah, I think because it's only getting tougher to lead during these times. We've similarly have looked at a bunch of them, but haven't yet found one that we think stands out as being differentiated and enough to lean in. Instead, I'd say we kind of approach more around leaning in more on culture-driven types of opportunities. So we're in a few businesses like Sounding Board, which delivers, coaching more for the up and comers in the organization, or peer groups where they'll bring people together so that you can kind of share in some of the challenges that you have. And some are cross company, so there's that level of anonymity. Others are more focused on specific domain, like I'm a product manager and I want more coaching around, and support from others in my peer group. But yeah, we still have a ways to go on really figuring out how to make work healthier for people.
Definitely. You mentioned culture, Karin, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, both of you. One of the biggest challenges that I've come across when it comes to company culture is when you have a hybrid workforce. Some people are at home and they don't get exposed to that culture as much. And what makes it even more difficult is if you have a company that was all in person before the pandemic, they all went home. And as they were at home, they still knew the people that they were talking to. They had met them in person before. But some companies scaled so rapidly over the last few years that they've literally never met some of their coworkers in person. And I know companies are starting to head back to the office, but there's still a ton of sublease space on the market. And a lot of companies are still, heavily hybrid or heavily remote. So when it comes to company culture and how to build it and how to maintain it and then how to scale it, especially when you have a hybrid workforce, has either one of you come across anything that sounds promising or at least interesting on that front?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to be talking my book so much in the sense that we have a lot of companies that are focused on one of them a lot of people have used. It's called Donut, which is a water cooler bringing people together, and in some ways it's been able to help with onboarding, which I think is really important for the initial experience, and then even just matching people across the company so that there's a little bit more of the serendipity. One of the things I love about the design of Bloomberg offices is there's always a central space that you kind of walk into, and there's this great pantry with a lot of snacks. And Mike did that because he wanted people to bump into each other while eating popcorn, that kind of thing. And so I feel like Donut in some ways does that. The other thing that's been really important, and Max, you wrote about this, I'd say you had something in a post around intentionality. I think that leaders just have to step up and realize it's going to be harder and devote much more time and be very proactive about checking in with the people on their teams. And we're starting to see more technology around organizing these one-on-one catch-ups to do it effectively, things like that. The other thing that we're seeing that I really like is something like a bonusly, where it will make sure that people get rewarded and recognized for the good work they do. And it, rides through Slack so that everyone sees it, everyone knows about it. And people start to at least communicate a little bit more in the virtual water cooler. That being said, I do really endorse teams doing offsites and making sure that they come together at least with some level of frequency. So it's easier to put a name to the face where you can.
100%.
I don't know, Gale, have you seen anything interesting? I mean, this is all about people, right? And so I'm curious if there's something in your portfolio you love that would be good things for all of us to be incorporating into our remote leadership.
We actually have not made a bet in this space yet. So we'll make a bet or two out of this fund. And I think it goes back to a lot of what we see is it's involving people, or it's I've seen a lot of activities based or event based solutions where trying to bring people together to foster culture. And I like these businesses, but we're really looking for larger TAMs in terms of the types of businesses that we do. But it is important, and the data shows that about it's a 2.5 day in the office, 2.5 day at home average across all companies today. I think that's going to persist into the future. Even though we're hearing about layoffs, and I do think we're going to hear about some more of them in the next month or two, but the labor market is still relatively good. And so what that means is there's a lot of open jobs out there, and people are able to switch jobs relatively easily still in today's market. And that means that employers are going to have to retain that hybrid or remote option in order to retain their best talent. So when I think about looking into these culture building solutions, I'm really looking for it to roll up to talent management. That's another gap that I really want to make a big bet in this fund. Aside from Workday, there's not much out there that really helps organizations understand the talent that they have sitting within their walls and outside of their walls. So what solution is going to offer that kind of visibility? And I do think that culture is a piece of that. So I'm always looking for something that's going to roll up to this bigger data play above that culture building solution.
Mm-hmm. What's your take on, where you think kind of in-person or hybrid is going? Do you think that across the board it's going to be 2.5 days in, 2.5 days out, or is it going to be, by team, or what are you seeing, or maybe what are some of your portfolio companies doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's here to stay. For most companies, I think some companies are going to make people go back into the office, and if it worked for them before, maybe it'll continue to work for them. Like, my guess is the companies with the best talent are not going to be able to do that, because they're going to leave. The best people are going to leave if they want to. And when I look at my set of peers, a lot of people have young families. A lot of people are at a point where they've worked their ass off for 15 years and they want to travel. And so I think this idea of flexibility, it's not fleeting. It is something that leaders have to really, truly understand. And to Karen's point about offsites, that's a way to bring people together. So this is a huge market that will continue to be interesting to watch. But yeah, it's here to stay. I don't think it's going away.
What I love about this, and Karin, before you make a comment, I just want to jump in real quick. What's interesting is, you mentioned the design of Bloomberg's office to be this town hall, right? And when you and I were on our call, everybody kept coming up to you saying, "Hey, Karin, hey, how's it going?" Saying hello, right? And that, I think, is the purpose of the office going forward, right? This is why I think we're all, on this live stream, if not at home, then in an uninterrupted, quiet space, because that's the objective. But then if you go into the office, you're not going to get, especially if you're not in the office all the time, Karin, like you're not going to get a lot of downtime, right? You're going to want to catch up with people. And so I think that going forward, in my mind, the role of the office is a town square, right? It's where people come together to catch up, to do things that you can't, digitize, right? And in addition to the collaboration that just kind of is better, I think, when you're in person. But Karin, I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
So yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the environment that, if you can create the town square or something that has that energy, there's definitely going to be a group of people that want to be there and be part of it. for a whole host of reasons. What I'll say is what we're seeing. I love that Gale's very data driven, so I'll try and based on the couple hundred companies and founders that we've backed, I'd say we have the whole spectrum. Some people require and want their teams to be 100% in the office. Others are, they're never going back to having a physical space. And then there's the in between kind of thing. And so what's really happening is leaders, whatever they decide is the right policy for their company, they need to figure out how to create the environment that's going to support that. So if the convergence is somewhere around 2 to 3 days in the office, then a leader has to really be present and make it worth people's while for them to be in the office. The commute time, there's definitely friction that gets added. Now, there are some people that I've spoken with who are like, I can't work at home. I really need the office. And also, quite frankly, some who are younger or a little bit earlier in their careers or earlier in their career in a new career are saying, well, I really want to be around other people so I can learn by the osmosis of, or the ambient interactions that I wouldn't necessarily get access to. And so I think there are going to be a lot of drivers that good leaders can leverage in order to get people to come into the office if they want that to be the case. But again, it goes back to that word of being very intentional about it and, ensuring that what they do is create the right space where those conversations and interactions can happen.
Exactly. I will say this, the prevailing perspective is you go to the office to collaborate with people and you're at home when you need quiet, right? And to do your heads down work. What I've heard in the past, which is a really interesting perspective that it's harder for some people to sort of grasp, is some people actually the only place they can get quiet time is at the office. And this is after the kids are back in school and done with remote learning. Some people younger in their careers, a lot of people live with roommates, right? And if your roommates happen to be at home and they're not being quiet, you're not going to want to have, all that ruckus in your conference call or when you're trying to get heads down work done.
And I was going to say, to her point on mental health, I mean, I always used to be very ardent and I'd like to separate my work from my home so that home could just be a place where, I'd have more ideas and relax and things of that. The pandemic really did us a disservice, right? I mean, the kitchen table became the work, the office desk, and so I think there's an opportunity there too if we really do want to get back to setting more boundaries around our time, if we can.
So I do think the pandemic did us a disservice in terms of introducing a new problem of setting boundaries and when do you turn it off when you're at home. But I'll have the counterpoint to what you said, which is actually I think it was a benefit to get to know some of people's personal lives because some people just aren't as good at sharing and you can't really help but share when your cat like jumps on your shoulder or your kid walks in to the room. But also it helped people be more empathetic around the needs of others, right? So if somebody says, I can't be on that call, I got to go pick up my kid from preschool, then you have had those interactions with people throughout the pandemic during lockdowns and you're like, oh yeah, that is something that somebody else is going through and that helps people with empathy. So I feel like in that sense, it did do us a favor if there's, any sort of silver lining.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I learned so much about people I've worked with for, a decade, right? It's really amazing.
Totally. And by the way, if you're watching or listening in, we'll get to questions in a little bit. So just feel free to drop the questions on whatever platform you're listening in, and we should get them in the chat here. And then if we have any, I'll get to those before we wrap. So I want to talk a little bit about lessons and advice. I'm sure there are a lot of people that would love to get on either one of your calendars just to ask you about a little bit of, to get a little bit of your advice and wisdom. As you think back on the last almost 3 years now, right? Which is crazy to even think about that. And now that we're sort of coming out of this pandemic and reemerging into the world, what lessons did the pandemic teach you about effective leadership?
I'll answer in a way that I think is relevant to a lot of leaders, not just me, because my team is fairly small. There are only 6 or 7 of us. What I hear and see out there is the need to really pay attention and listen, I think, is the number one learning from the pandemic. Even the conversation that we just had about, do people want to be in the office? Do they want to stay home? There's a variety of interests and variety of viewpoints that employees have just on that one topic alone. So it makes the charge that that leaders have really hard. How do they create a solution where everybody feels safe? It's just tough. So you have to talk to people. You have to really listen to them and make them feel heard. And I think the organizations that are doing this really well, they have strong cultures, they have strong values, and their employees resonate with those values. That they have, the ability to do things from an organizational perspective that really fits with what employees are looking for. So I guarantee you that those organizations have strong communication channels, and a lot of them don't. And those that don't, I think, are really going to struggle with this question, which is not going to go away, because we're always going to see competing interests in terms of what employees want and need. Another point on the development, somebody that's a millennial like me versus a Gen Z who's younger versus somebody that's later in their career, all have different needs in terms of how we progress. So like that stuff is just really, really challenging for leaders today.
Mm-hmm.
It's gotten so much harder. So yeah, I just double underscore that. I'm personally, we have a relatively small team as well. And there's just, being even more hyper aware about what's going on with everyone has, I think, I always considered myself to be an empathetic, individual, but it's also emotionally very hard when you're taking that all on as a leader. And I think it's going to continue to be a very lonely job in those types of roles. So getting coaching and, finding outlets is going to be really important as well in order to thrive. To turn things on a little bit more of a positive angle, I do think that this is going to be, I kind of called it, everyone says the great resignation and all that, but I think it's kind of a great opportunity. Like, if somebody is an exceptional leader, I think the talent will be there in terms of people that want to work with her or him or them. And so now more than ever, I think it's a great time to be building a company, because there's potentially less, the tourists have gone home, and, and there still is capital out there, and, and they can really shine in terms of recruiting talent, in terms of getting on customers' potential radar.
I'm going to completely steal that line. The tourists have gone home. That is outstanding. Karin, you brought up a point earlier that I thought was so interesting and totally the opposite of how I was thinking about this. With all of those people being laid off, my thought was, well, that's great for a startup founder or any company to scoop them up, right? Because now there's over 40,000 people just in these 3 companies that are out of a job. But actually, your point is so much more powerful, which is a good number of those people is probably going to start a company, right?
Come see Gale and me if they are.
Yeah. And they wouldn't have done that, right? So maybe all these companies that are laying people off are actually doing us a favor. We just won't know it until years down the road.
I'd say over the years, we look at the sources of our data, the sources of our founders, and some of the founders we backed have been really high potential talent that have left some of the startups and tech companies that have been, scaling quite rapidly. They had the advantage of seeing something go from, a relatively small scale to, tens of millions, and they kind of catch the bug and say, hey, maybe I can do that too. And as long as they don't get too comfortable and used to flying business class and, all that kind of stuff, they might have a shot at it.
Sometimes it just takes someone else forcing your hand, making the decision for you.
Exactly.
Well, last question. What would you say to your fall of 2019 self?
Do not do hype deals. Do not do hype deals. Do not do hype deals. Who cares if LPs tell you you need to be in deals with really big names? Don't do those deals.
Wise.
Yeah, very wise. And I'd say also, I continue to struggle to find the balance. Like I love what we do so much that I probably and again going back to the empathetic, it's like unfortunately, or for better or worse, I've seen a couple of cycles in the technology realm and the venture funding thing. And so I think once the pandemic started, the spidey sense and the alarm bells went off, and we're on speed dial for all of our founders. And so I would probably go back to myself and say, okay, continue to realize we're in this for the long game, and you got to be on speed dial, but you also got to find a way to, balance this a little bit more. And, not that I was totally bad. I've introduced like walking meetings, like I've done a lot of things, or I amplified. I was always doing the walking meetings. When you live in New York, you can't help but do walking meetings. But I think, finding that way to separate work from, having a little bit more downtime during challenging times is really challenging. And I wish I had been better at it.
Well, I'll tell you what, nothing introduces balance into your life like kids.
Yes, that's true.
That will force it, I promise you. Well, ladies, this has been awesome. Karin, Klein from Bloomberg Beta, Gale Wilkinson from VITALIZE. Thank you both for joining and sharing your wisdom. And thanks to everyone else for tuning into the future of work, investing in the future of work. I am Max Czapowski, and I will talk to you next time.
Thank you.
All right. So